The hierarchy of controls. Now, the hierarchy of controls is something from our safety toolkit, but we can translate this and use it in continuous improvement as well, because when we talk about incidents in a safety context, what we're really talking about is defects, right? An incident in safety would be a defect for us. Now, sometimes in our projects, we are actually trying to influence safety. So that would actually make sense that anytime there was an incident, that would be a defect in our process. Now, what I want to take is, or what we're going to do is we're going to look at the hierarchy of controls as designed. We'll look at some examples, and then we'll look at it for a Lean Six Sigma context. So looking at the hierarchy of controls, we have a triangle. At the top of the triangle are the fewest incidents. We've eliminated them, the potential to even have an incident. And then at the bottom, what we see with PPE or personal protective equipment is that the incident has occurred, but we've protected our people from it. We've made it harder for them to be injured by the incident, right? And so at the bottom of the triangle, you have the most potential for incidents to happen. You have the most hazards present in your process. So that PPE is going to be protecting people when the hazard happens. Administrative controls is going to be changing the way the people work. That might be SOPs, that might be training. Engineering controls, we're going to isolate people from the hazard. So if you think of a piece of rotating equipment, if we just leave that open, somebody could walk by and their shirt or something could be caught in it, they could be injured. But if we put just a cover over that, now we've isolated that hazard so that it's away from people, so that it's really hard for people to be injured by it. Now, we could tell with administrative controls, people don't lean into it, don't walk by that, but that still has the potential for incident, right? And then we have substitution. So trading one hazard for one that's less hazardous. So let's say we have this piece of equipment with something that's rotating in it. What if we trade it for a piece of equipment that doesn't have that rotating function? Now, even if the cover falls off, we know that our people are going to be separated from that hazard. That hazard cannot impact us in the same way. And then we have elimination. Elimination says the hazard cannot exist. We've eliminated all potential for that hazard to happen. If we think about the gas caps on our cars, where you could just put it up on the side of the pump and you could drive away and that would stay. And then we got a little dongle so that it kind of hangs off, but it's harder for us to lose it, right? We've kind of made an engineering control there. But then Ford actually eliminated that from even happening by making it so that you don't need a gas cap at all. They've eliminated the potential for that to happen. And so that's really what we're working towards, is trying to work up this triangle so that we actually eliminate the potential for an incident or a defect to even happen. So let's look at this example with COVID. If we look at personal protective equipment, throughout COVID, we've used PPE to make it harder for us to have exposure to COVID. We'll still have exposure, but by wearing masks or gloves or different types of PPE, we're able to reduce the risk, reduce the exposure that we have to COVID. Then we look at administrative controls. Administrative controls would be like mandates, where we tell people, hey, if you take these actions, if you stay 6 feet apart, then you're going to be okay. Right? So we've told people stay 6 feet apart, but how good are people at staying 6 feet apart? I'm going to say not that good based on the grocery stores that I've shopped at. And then we have engineering controls. So some places have actually put in glass or barriers to actually separate us, right? So if we don't adhere to the 6 feet, there's still something there in engineering control to protect us from the hazard, to protect us from exposure to COVID. And then we have substitution. So substitution would be like the vaccine. We know that the vaccine comes with some risks, but the risks or the potential for us to become ill from the vaccine are much less than the potential risk of us being exposed or being ill from COVID. So we've substituted those hazards. And then finally, we have elimination. Now, New Zealand is one of the countries that actually took an elimination approach. They, for a long time, didn't have any COVID or very, very little COVID out in the community. So every person that was ill actually had genome testing done on it, and they were able to track actually their different contacts and if it was spread to others. So they took an elimination strategy to COVID. Now, they eventually had to abandon that strategy, so they didn't continue with that. Elimination can be very expensive and hard to maintain. So that's looking at the hierarchy of controls in a safety context. So let's talk about the hierarchy of controls in relationship to Lean Six Sigma, because you're looking at all your improvements saying, well, why isn't training as good as this other option, right? If you're trying to decide between those two, and quite often SOPs and training will be the ones that come up. So let's talk about why those are effective, but not as effective as some of the other potential improvements that you identify. So let's go ahead and start with elimination. Now, in Lean Six Sigma, we have a tool for this already, or something we talk about, which is poka-yoke, right? Eliminating all potential for a defect to occur, making sure that we eliminate that completely. Now, substitute, we're simply substituting something for something with fewer defects, right? That will cause fewer defects. Engineering control, same thing. We're isolating ourselves from the potential defect, right? Whatever those conditions are that created that defect, we are going to try to keep people away from that as much as possible so that that's more automated maybe. Then we have sensory controls. Now, some people call it visuality or visual controls, but these are things that maybe alert us to that the hazard may be about to occur, or the incident or the defect might be about to occur. We have these visual controls that alert us, or ways that we can color code things, or cheat sheets that we can offer people that are at their workstations that can have them identify these things before they happen. And then we have administrative controls. So that's the same. We're talking about SOPs, training. We're telling people, hey, don't do that, right? Don't walk by that rotating equipment and get stuck. Don't do whatever activity potentially leads to a defect. Now, training people is really hard to get those behaviors to stick. And then finally, we have what I'm going to call defect management. So this means that the defect occurred, but we're trying to manage the exposure of the company or the customer to that defect. So let's look at some examples. So let's take a look here. I just got a new puppy. So with that new puppy, I'm going to be honest, it's a whole adventure to have a cute little new puppy. And this puppy has been known to chew on important items, right? So whenever the puppy chews on an important item, I'm considering that a defect. Now, if we had done a whole project on this, we would look at all those variables that allowed the puppy to chew on those items, or why the puppy might be chewing on items. Right? But let's say we have a bunch of ideas up on the board, and we're trying to decide which of these improvements are going to address the root causes that we identified. So if we took a damage or a defect management approach that says that the things got chewed on, right? Because that's our defect, is anything that got chewed on. So it would be things got chewed on, but even though they got chewed on, we had some kind of triage system, or we had insurance or something to make sure that we weren't as negatively impacted as we could be once they got chewed on. Administrative controls would be that training that we're going to do with the puppy. So telling the dog, no, don't chew on that. Hey, stop that. That's not good, right? This is something that's going to have a big impact in the long run, but right now it's a lot of work. And the puppy right now is chewing on my side table. So this is a great example of our little puppy here chewing on things she shouldn't. Okay, let's look at some other examples, Jennifer. Let's see, we have administrative controls that we talked about. Telling the dog, no, don't chew on that. It's not working so well this first week. Then we've got sensory controls, those visual or auditory controls. That could be having some kind of alert or ring when the dog goes near areas that have important items that we don't want them to chew on. Engineering controls, we could put the dog in a cage so she can't have access to those things that she could chew on. Or maybe we reorganize our room to eliminate access for her to get to those important items. And then we have substitute. So hopefully we'll cover her little ears here for this one. But if we were going to substitute, maybe we would change her out for an older dog, right? One that doesn't have so many chewing issues. And then elimination would be getting rid of the dog, right? That would be actually the way that we could be sure that none of our important items got chewed on. But that's not what we're going to do. We're not going to take the elimination or substitution approach. So don't worry, that's not on the table. So let's look at this for a project that might be a little closer to something you would do. So anytime a customer waits over 30 minutes for an oil change, we're considering that a defect. Okay, so that's going to be what a defect is here. So elimination would be maybe either your car doesn't even need an oil change. We change cars so that they don't need an oil change. Substitute might be that we add more services. So it might be changing, adding, or removing services. Maybe if you add services, then the 30 minutes no longer applies. If you remove services, then maybe you can hit that oil change in 30 minutes more often. It makes it easier to do that. Or maybe we restrict which cars can actually get an oil change at our service station. So maybe Jaguars and BMWs take a lot longer, so we decide those won't continue. Engineering controls. So engineering controls might be that we create a robot that does the service. So we have some kind of automation there that makes it really easy and consistent to hit that 30 minutes. We might also see that we've re-engineered the process so that our employees don't have the potential or as much potential to become overworked, right? So we've changed it so that there is a booking system so that every 30 minutes a new car comes in and we no longer have times where we get overwhelmed with vehicles, right? So this is something where we've re-engineered our process. Sensory controls, those are visual or auditory controls, that visual management piece. So maybe we've created an alert system so that every time someone's been waiting for 20 minutes, a red light goes off, or there's some kind of indicator in the bay that a car is about to go over that 30 minutes, that we have 10 minutes to get that done. And then finally, we have admin controls. So maybe we've created standard operating procedures or we've trained people on how to conduct those oil changes. And then finally, protection. So maybe that incident occurred. If it goes over 30 minutes, though, we give customers a free pass. We give them some kind of discount to reduce that cost. So when we're looking at those hierarchy of controls, what we want to use that for is to help us to push up to those better improvements so that when we look at all of those ideas on the board, you can select the ones that are going to have the biggest impact on your process.